One of the major questions that Jesus asks his disciples is, who do you think that I am? And the answers are varied. An incarnation of John the Baptist, Elijah returned, a prophet, an angel, Son of Man, Son of God, Messiah. All are good answers, but in the end they do not fully explain who Jesus was and who Jesus is. Jesus is all of those and none of those. All of those terms are human categories to explain the mystery of God becoming flesh in the person of Jesus Christ. But we ask ourselves the same question. Who are we? We are interconnected and networked. We consume information like never before in the history of humankind. We are at home all over the globe, and to us nothing seems impossible. And despite all that, the basic human question remains. Who are we, and what do the people say that we are? Today, the possibilities to define ourselves on the social networks are sheer endless. And that is where self-definition happens in this day and age. Online is where you find friends who give you likes and share your posts. That is where you buy your groceries and where you find a mate. There are more than 150 words recorded on Facebook to describe your sexual orientation. There are personal styles that influence what you wear and how your apartment looks like. And they range from steampunk to goth to retro hippie. And all those categories are yours to choose from. And there is no authority that denies you your self-definition. And if those categories are not enough, then they also can be mixed and mingled until you find that particular nuance that describes you best. The retro hippie with slight steampunk leanings who is also no stranger to goth. And you don't have to stick with it either. A new day brings a new lifestyle, a new self-definition that captures the essence as it is at this particular moment. If that doesn't make any sense to you, congratulations. You're officially old. Like I am. My daughter has explained that to me, and when I didn't get the nuances or didn't get the main point, that proves that I'm just an old white guy who is left over from a time where that self-defining was much easier. It was a happier time. Except when you had to run away from the dinosaurs who defined all of us as lunch or dinner depending on the time of day. But who are we? Who do we want to be? How do we define what we are? Those questions are a quest to discover the core of our humanity. When we can name it, then we can access it. And when we can access it, we can embody it. Today's categories, of course, might be unfamiliar to us old people. We don't live online as much as our young people do. But to pick the right kind of cowboy boots that signals to everybody in the dance hall who is coming now, that is a version of self-determination that might be more familiar. What car do we drive? Where do we live? And some of us have money galore, but we want to live where the poor artists live who struggle to make a living from the occasional art gig and waiting tables. The East Village in New York was cheap enough once so that artists could live there. Then came the people with the money, and they wanted to partake in this creative energy. And then market forces commenced, and soon the struggling artists had to take their creative energy elsewhere. To find out who one is one of the basic needs of human life. Because who you are has consequences in how you live your life. But there are many people who are not free to choose their identity. In them might also live a poet who is a gender-fluid redneck, for instance. But because of the color of their skin or the coincidence of their birthplace or whatever it might be, they are forced into a predefined identity that is inescapable. The self-definition of a slave, for instance, is completely without consequence. Who a slave is predefined, and that impossibility of self-exploration and self-actualization is a particular nasty way to deny someone's humanity. You force people long enough into an identity, and then it becomes part of who they are. And there were certainly people of enormous talent among the African American slaves who could have moved mountains and the world and could have changed everything if they were allowed to find out who they really are. But their talents were wasted on the cotton fields because other people had defined themselves as a master race. And then there are the people who are lured away from the core of their humanity. That is what Jesus is experiencing today in our gospel story. The tempter tries to blind Jesus and lure him away from who Jesus really is. Jesus does not define himself by power and wealth. Jesus defines himself by the Word of God, by the love of an infinitely graceful maker of the world whose creative energy is the source of all being. But when Jesus believes that he is something else, then he will not be able to bridge the gap between God and humans. Jesus will not be able to fulfill the purpose of his being, and that seems to be exactly the tempter's goal. The forces of evil are real. They are powerful. They sound reasonable. They make sense. They are compelling, and therein lies their power. Everybody can spot the guy with the horns and the hooves who wears a perfume of sulfur. But what Jesus rejects here could do a lot of good when handled correctly and with integrity. Power is not evil in itself. Power can do great things, and wealth is not evil in itself. Wealth can do a lot of good. But wealth and power can blind people so they lose themselves in shallow self-indulgence that can quickly become toxic when power and wealth are the only things that define them. When rich people define themselves by love, then they live a different life than when they choose to define themselves by their net worth. You handle power differently when you follow the way of Christ than when you follow the theorists of realpolitik. Depending on how people define themselves, they become the people of their definitions. Being evil is a choice people make. It is a choice they do not need to make. Jesus recognizes that he has all the power he needs for his mission. He has all the wealth he will ever need. God has chosen Jesus' location among the poor with careful intention. From those who are lowest on the social hierarchy emerges the love of God that embraces the whole human race. Today, the season of Lent starts. It is a time to think about who we are and who we want to be. To be disciples of Christ, we need nothing but the will to follow Jesus. Amen.